Sports Interaction, Canada Sportsbook.
Salut tout le monde, bienvenue. Hey everybody, welcome. Hey, that was fun, right? That was fun. I am Marc Dumont. I will be your host right now. Andrew is not available, but for good reason. I'd love to show you the picture, but anyways, he's out of surgery. He had his surgery, went successful. He lived. He's doing great, but we're giving him a little bit of a break here because with the kids and the games, it's a little bit much. And, you know, the surgery to get rid of part of his teeth. But he's doing healthy and he'll be back at one point, probably early March. In the meantime, you're stuck with me. But the good news is we have a great guest tonight, friend of the show, Ian Boisvert, is the managing editor of Rapid Habs. Also his podcast, The Build. We'll get into that a little bit later. But in the meantime, get some ideas going because we had just a fun game overall. We're talking about guys like Justin Barron showing their worth, and that in particular is very important for the rebuild, just because he checks so many boxes. Raphaël Harvey-Pinard continues to impress. How about Samuel Montembeault? Trizak, we're going to get into the chat in a moment, but I'm not going to trade Montembeault tonight. I don't know about Jake Allen, but we'll see. And obviously, we have Jonathan Kovacevic, who's playing well. We also saw Nick Suzuki get off the schneid. And for those listening in English, Dan Robertson had the call. That was fun. I just absolutely love Brian Mudryk, but it's just great to hear a familiar voice. So we're going to bring in our guest right after our ad copy. We're going to get to that right now. Want to bet? You can do it at Sports Interaction, Canada's Sportsbook. Hockey season well underway. Pitchers and catchers have reported, which always blows my mind that they report so early. But hey, man, vacation's over. Baseball is around the corner. You can bet pregame, live in-play. There's a ton of prop bets. It's made by Canadians for Canadians. Sports Interaction makes it easy to deposit, play, and cash out. Join now and see all sports betting has to offer. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. That's sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. Ontario only, 19 plus. Please play responsibly. Let's go ahead and bring in our guest, Ian Boisvert. Ian, how's it going, buddy?
Marc, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Now, that was fun, right? I know. Okay, listen, are you team tank or are you team it's okay for teams to win a game during a season?
I believe that I'm on a spectrum between the two of those. I think I'm closer to team tank, very close to pro tank, but I'm not going to let this win ruin my night. It was a good time, especially, some of the banter going back and forth between Devils fans and Canadiens fans on Twitter ahead of the game.
I didn't see any of that, but I know Devils fans can be pretty passionate, just like Habs fans, right?
Yeah, it leads to a very combustible environment.
But a very civil discourse, I'm sure.
Naturally, always.
So there you go, and this is funny because I always kind of tag it team tank and team, realistic, but there are multitudes between it. The Canadiens fans contain multitudes. You can be a little bit up and down, and tonight, I think, first of all, shout out to the show, to the fans. No, not shout out to the show, to the fans. We have all our regulars in here tonight, my favorite people. If you have any questions, don't hesitate. I think we have to start off by saying, a lot of people say it's not New Jersey's best game. I think they were actually quite good. Realistically, this was all Samuel Montembeault. How impressive has he been this year?
Yeah, it's really been, especially the second half of the year, he's sort of had to carry a lot of the burden. With Jake Allen going down with injury, he kind of hasn't let off the gas at all from that point on. He was fantastic. I thought, some of the saves that he was making, he was kicking out a few rebounds, and he didn't look particularly, steady at the onset of the game, but he picked up steam as it went on. He looked virtually unbeatable by the end of it. They needed a really sloppy one at the end of the third period to beat him a second time. He was fantastic. And like you said, I thought the Devils played a decent game. Yeah. It just seemed like every time they made a mistake, the Canadiens capitalized on it.
We've talked about the lack of Canadiens prospects in terms of goalies right now. Actually, there's Jacob Dobesh, which I really don't think people should sleep on. He's having a fantastic year. If you look at his stats year to year, they're a little bit down, but he's the only reason Ohio State's a top 10 ranked team. But let's just ignore that and come back to something a little more short term. Is Samuel Montembeault a goalie of the future?
He's certainly, he's not. Goaltenders typically age a little bit slower. They come of age a little bit, longer than most NHL players do. I don't It's tough to tell. I like the approach that Kent Hughes is going at it with. He mentioned it in one of his last press availabilities that he's not going to trade him. They look at Montembeault and they see a young goaltender and they want to see how this plays out. They've got him, I think, under contract for one more year after this one, and then he's an RFA, so he's
At
still
just 1
Canadians
million.
property. Yeah, yeah, it's a really clean contract. It's a good problem to have if you're the Canadians, who, like you said, they don't have a a Carter Hart in their system, so to speak, somebody who came up and knowing full well they were going to be the starting goaltender of their franchise by the time they were NHL ready. They don't have one of those. Jakub Dobeš, like you said, is probably the closest thing the Canadians might have to that. And even then, he might be 2-3 years away from playing, any NHL minutes. I know Frederick Disho, the gnome, he has a similar esque sort of pedigree. He's massive for one, which is always good when it comes to goalies because it's just a much smaller net to shoot at. But they don't have a sure thing, and even sure things as far as goaltenders go aren't sure things. It's a very volatile position to analyze past one season. There are who would have thought that Sam Montembeault would have been this a year ago, right?
No one.
Who's to say what he's going to be next year? So the Canadians are keeping their options open. They are just sitting back and watching this play out, which they ought to. I feel really good for Montembeault because last year was a terrible, rotten, no good year for him, and this year has been almost the complete opposite.
And I think we have to give him some credit for last year, by the way, because he needed surgery. Let's be perfectly honest. The entire season he needed surgery, so he kind of held that off. I think the Canadians kind of owe him a little extra leash now since he played so well. Like, in the chat, for example, I'm getting checked here, which I get it, by Noel. Or is it Noel? I never figured that out. When I talk about goalie of the future, I'm talking about, let's say, for the next 3 to 4 to 5 years. I'm not talking about a franchise goalie or anything like that. But as Ian mentioned right at the start, goalies peak later. Like, it's a statistical fact. So them coming into their own at 26 is perfectly normal. Jordan Binnington, so etc. I mean, he never matured past being a baby, but he's a really good goalie at times. So, I always take it with a grain of salt when there's bad years. Obviously, you want to see more from guys like Primo, but what Montembeault is doing now with a questionable defense, the Canadians allow 15 high danger shots per game. You can't not give them that opportunity. It would be a bad sign, I think, for the entire team. But in the meantime, did you trade Jake Allen? Sorry, I lied and I said I wouldn't trade him until the third segment, but we're jumping right into it.
I have a hard time believing that there's going to be that large of a market for someone like Jake Allen. And I don't mean that to say like that he's a bad goaltender. I don't think that's true. I think he plays behind a very poor defensive hockey team. As I could have said for Montembeault, Montembeault's stats have been fantastic this season as far as goals saved above expected. The same can't be said for Jake Allen. And I think a lot of that is because, as you said, they give up 15 high danger chances a game. It's not sustainable.
Usually in the first period, too.
Yeah, especially in Jake Allen games. It seems like they're at the 40 mark by the time that the second period's over. So, I mean, if you could find a market for him, I guess I have a hard time finding, seeing teams that would, pony up assets for a goaltender who hasn't really been all that strong this year. I could be wrong. The NHL is a weird place.
That's what I like because we're talking about general managers here, not necessarily, general managers will say Jake Allen has a Stanley Cup ring, even though, like, statistically speaking, if you have one ring, there are very little odds you'll ever get a second, but you never know. So first of all, shout out to the chat. We have actually someone was very nice. James Mahoney. How's it going, James? He says I'm the best. So clearly that's family. How's it going? This must be my mother pretending to be James Mahoney. But welcome to the chat and welcome everyone else. We're glad to have you. The Montreal Canadiens just beat the high-flying New Jersey Devils. And a big part of that was the opening goal by Justin Barron. I think Justin Barron is crucial for this development, almost more than guys like Kaden Guhle. And shout out to Paper Dolls, Kay in our chat. She's going to be upset I said that. Guhle Nation's still strong, but Justin Barron shoots from the right, puck retrieval, quick in transition, good on the power play. These are things we lack on the roster. So what's your overview of Justin Barron, and especially the time he spent in Laval? I feel like that's become quite a positive for him.
Yeah, going to Laval, you get to sort of grow a bit out of the spotlight coming into Montreal, regardless of the expectations that were on this team this season. They were already very low. Every player that's on this team is under a microscope at all times. To give that player an opportunity to go down to Laval, play a bunch, you know, just learn how to play the professional game. He hasn't played that much in the American Hockey League or the National Hockey League up until this season.
Mhm.
I think a big part of it too is it seems like when they came back from the All-Star break, they flipped the switch and the defense just seems way more active.
Big
They
time.
seem like they're jumping up in plays more often. He's a huge benefactor of that. Jordan Harris has looked
Oh yeah.
fantastic. We saw Jonathan Kovacevic get into it today.
Yes.
Like that when you look at all that, and then you also see a guy like Lane Hudson showing up potentially next season, potentially after that. You see that they're trying to build a defense that leaves the old way they used to build defense in the past, where it belongs. They getting these guys to play more, up tempo hockey is going to improve their play dramatically on both ends of the ice. So to circle back on what that meant for Justin Barron, he's able to jump up in the rush. He scored his first goal recently. This one was a very similar play. I hope that becomes a hallmark of his offensive ability. And it's nice to see him coming into his own, especially because the Canadiens traded a fan favorite in Artturi Lehkonen for him. It's nice to see that finally starting to pay off, and I hope that this is just an upward trajectory from here.
And the other strong part is you have someone from Nova Scotia on the team, which was just I've come to the realization after almost 4 decades on this planet that the more Nova Scotia, the better, right? So we had Dan Robinson calling Justin Barron's goal tonight. That worked out well, and we also have we have an East Coaster in the chat. So Trinka83. I say Maritimes a lot. Should I stop saying? I feel like East Coasters or Blue Nosers are like, why would you ever say Maritimes? But I enjoy the term Maritimes. Okay, to get away from the game tonight, we have actually a question from the chat here from Colin McDonald. He's asking if Montreal ends up top 5. So let's say in this scenario, Connor Bedell surprisingly goes first, and Adam Fantilli goes second. So let's just say you have the pick of the litter of the rest. By judging by tonight, because you saw a team that was missing a few key elements despite the win, who would you go for? Who would fit best in this organization?
I talked about this a few weeks ago on my show, The Build, where I predicted a scenario where the Canadiens don't pick, they pick right at the edge of that top 5. And I don't think that this is what the current Canadiens administration would do, but I think I would go with Matvei Michkov if he's still available at 5. Yes, you're not going to get him in a year. You're not going to get him in 2 years.
So
probably get him in that third year. He could there is a way that he can buy himself out of his KHL contract, but that's not likely. But it doesn't matter because he is, other than Bedard, he might be the most dynamic forward in this draft, from everything that I've read and understood. So if I'm picking 5, I'm going to swing for the fences and then maybe go safe with the Florida pick. But that's just that would be me, and I'm not in charge of the team for good reason.
Let's keep in mind Michkov. I mean, when you say he other than Bedell is the most talented, that's hands down in my opinion. And I'd even argue in the last few years he would go first in almost like this guy. Obviously the Russian factor is there, but on pure talent, keep in mind at 18 years old, very tough to produce in the KHL. Very tough to produce. Yeah. It's not just the skill of competition. Coaches just don't trust young players, and especially if they have a flight risk of going to North America, there can be some issues. We're talking about 8 goals, 6 assists in 24 games. That is almost unheard of. That's way more than Ovechkin was producing, around that age. So I'm with you on that one. Michkov has that elite talent that the Canadiens miss. When you look at this roster, if you include Caulfield, what are they missing? That game-breaking talent. Leo Carlson's going to be quite good, and I like what I see from Zach Benson, Will Smith, but I'm with you. Michkov is worth it, and even if they have to wait a few years, I don't see that as a significant negative. In fact, you're delaying a whole bunch of things that might work out long term for the Canadiens. So, okay, I'm getting the lesson on the on the on the Maritimes thing. There's always It's like telling them there's a storm. They go out and buy chips. You ask them about the Maritimes, we get the answers. Um, Maritimes is PI Nova Scotia in New Brunswick, or as Rocksmasher says, No Fundswick. And Atlantic provinces is all of them. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, how does Labrador fit in there, though? Aha, see? Just messed everything up. Okay, so I would like to get back on track for this game, Ian, because there was a lot to like, in particular from Raphael Harvey-Pinard. We're seeing him and Josh Anderson provide that kind of 1-2 intense punch. What's the future for him? Because I mean, I don't see him on the top line, but hey, man, he's proving like that he belongs there, and there's not a single challenge that he hasn't met and absolutely decimated. So, what do you think Raphael Harvey-Pinard fits with this team?
Yeah, it's challenging. On a fully healthy Canadians team with new players coming into the roster. I don't know that I see Raphael Harvey-Pinard on the top line. Maybe he's a second line winger. But if he's a third line energy guy, like I don't. That's still a home run for the Canadians. He was
Right.
a seventh round draft pick. Like we're laughing if he turns into that sort of player. Um, but in the meantime, like you got to feel good for players who, organizationally, you see, a player in like Joel Teasdale in Laval at the moment. He's got to be looking at this, going like, if I get my shot, they're going to give me a fair shake at this. Um, you know, Jesse Ullinen is on the fourth line, yes, but he's also getting power play minutes, and he's looked pretty good. He had a fantastic assist in this game,
Mm-hmm.
on the Kovacevic goal. The Canadians are making it known that if you get called up, you're not going to play 9 minutes and then we'll send you back to Laval in a week. Like, they want to see these players perform. Now, it doesn't hurt that Harvey-Pinard has 10 points in 13 NHL games, which
Yeah.
won't be something he sustains over the course of his career, but it's still a great story nonetheless.
Yeah. Well, as Trezak mentions here, I mean, he could literally have like 5 games in the NHL. That's a great, like, statistically speaking, that is fantastic for a seventh round pick. And, you know, I can't think of very many in the Canadiens organized. Actually, Jake Evans would be another 7. He was drafted
Yeah.
212th overall. I think Rafael Pinal was 211, but just getting anything out of that is great. And I think it speaks a little bit to the development, right? To go back on what you talked about, Rafael Harvey Pinard was ready when he got here. Alex Belzil was ready when he got here. Justin Barron was ready when he got here. So is that an encouraging step for the Laval Rocket? Because we can throw flowers at Joël Bouchard all we want. The players weren't ready when they got up here. Let's be perfectly honest.
Right.
Now we're seeing that. That must be an encouraging step for the Canadiens.
Yeah, and I remember at the beginning of the season we were starting to question whether or not any of that was going to happen. The Laval at the beginning of the season kind of stunk. They're putting it together a little bit here and there
Without their
they've
star
also
players.
kind of
Like, that's
right, because they're up playing in Montreal and they've had injury issues of their own. They've been drawing from the ECHL, the Lions, the entire year. So, all of that on top of they're having the coaching staff teach them a new system so that when they come up, they are ready. It's sort of like the Penguins model, how they play the same system in their minor league affiliate, so that guys like Jake Gensel, when they make the jump from the AHL, they are in full stride already. It's not, it's not a jarring change to go from the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins to the NHL Penguins, overnight. That was all. It always seemed like a challenge for players to get called up. That's why the players, in Montreal that we tout as development successes, they never spent any time in the AHL. Gallagher never played much there. He played a few games during the lockout year.
Yeah, it was lockout.
Lehkonen entirely skipped it. Yeah, Lehkonen entirely skipped that. Jake Evans was one of the few that made it out of there. But, there's not a ton of successes from back then. We're starting to see that change, which is a real positive. I'm sure Adam Nicholas has his fingerprints all over it. But it's encouraging to see. Raphael Harvey-Pinard is hopefully not the last one of these that we see.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially with the influx of players that are about to hit, right? Like, we're talking about development, but you mentioned that Gallagher, he was the success story for Sylvain Lefebvre, and that was, again, he would have never been in the AHL if not for the lockout. So you're going 10 years without developing a single player. I can't exaggerate how much that put the Canadiens back in terms of just everything, right? So great news, because I feel like Ul really didn't get much of a fair shake. Everybody loved Bouchard, but a lot like me talked a lot, but not a lot of content was coming out, right? So I'm glad to see a guy that's maybe a little more reserved. Maybe he's not as bombastic, but he has guys ready. And like you say, just, I mean, the Penguins obviously have the Crosby cheat code, but seeing guys come and produce, like, it's so tough to produce in the fourth line. I hate it because it's setting up a prospect to fail. Because even veterans struggle in the fourth line, but he didn't just play well there; he dominated there. And now I feel like Anderson almost has to match his energy. But that's not to say Anderson's been bad. How about Josh Anderson, Ian? He looks like a man like on a mission, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, in the last few games offensively, he's been really strong. I thought this game he was terrific at both ends of the ice.
Mm-hmm.
He I think it was in the second period. He was out on the penalty kill, and he absolutely just stole a one-timer away from the Devils and dumped it, which likely saved a goal. I think that when Josh Anderson is playing his best, he's moving north-south. This game was full of that. For whatever reason, the Canadians got more odd man rushes tonight than they probably did all season.
Right?
It was a track meet of a hockey game, which is it's fun to watch, and it's the kind of game that Josh Anderson excels in.
Mm-hmm.
I know folks they want to try to see him get moved at this year's deadline. I don't know how the appetite for the Canadians doesn't seem to be there. Unless they get like a king's ransom, they're not one. They don't want to do it unless they absolutely get an offer they can't say no to. And I just think that there's a lot of teams who would like to make that trade, but the salary doesn't make sense. A Josh Anderson deal to me has always made more sense at the draft. There's tons of movement.
Yeah.
There's, you can trade a bunch of draft capital to get him. You can go 10% over the salary cap and then try to figure it out as the off season goes on. He was fantastic, and it's only good news for the Canadians if he plays like that, whether it's in seeing that top line continue to flourish even without Brendan Gallagher, or his trade stock going up.
And when you talk about trade value, I think to me personally, and I know I'm known for wanting to trade everyone. Trzak, I can see you, but I think the perceived value of Josh Anderson is actually way more than his actual value, if I'm being perfectly honest. Every single GM, I swear to God, at the GM board of governors, they all get together and chant about Josh Anderson, like how amazing he is and how much they want to have him on their team because he kind of fits that prototypical power forward, right? So
yeah,
I point to two things to why I think there should be a trade. One, let's be perfectly honest, this production has only come up when half the team is injured and playoffs are out of reach. Now, we can argue about that all day long, but you want to see more production when games matter. And two, I don't think his value will ever be higher than it is right now. We talk about maximizing asset value. To me, to do that, you actually have to trade players while they still have some value to capitalize on that little bit of a inflated perceived value around the league. So, I know teams are calling about Anderson, and I know people said that Hughes isn't picking up the calls, but he is. Let's just be perfectly honest; he'd be crazy not to. What would you take for him though? Like a decent first round pick and it gets it done, or?
Yeah, maybe you kick in a guy who was drafted in the fourth, fifth round,
like a B prospect.
You've probably got to add a salary to make it work too. Like I in all honesty, I think the Tampa Bay Lightning would be an awesome fit just because they're going to play Toronto in the first round, and Anderson seems to eat that team alive.
Right.
That would be, the Tampa Bay Lightning. They get they have all this salary cap wizardry just about every year. I don't know how they pull that kind of move off.
But they're willing to make moves, right? That's the key part.
Yeah.
They're willing to make those big moves.
Yeah. Yeah, and Montreal's probably not in a position where they want to retain any salary. It's a long deal. There's a lot of time left on it. I do think that there's a possibility the Canadians maybe get involved in eating salary in another deal, just like we saw the Minnesota Wild do in that Ryan O'Reilly trade, because with long-term injured reserve, they have about $4.5 million in cap space. That might not all be there at the end of the season, depending on when players come back, like Sean Monahan, like Brendan Gallagher. If those guys come back, there's still massive question marks. We have no idea what's going on with those guys. But there are going to be ways where the Canadians can add value at this deadline, even if it's not a Josh Anderson going out.
We heard from Arpin Basu. He was on TSN, and he mentioned the Canadians were actually in on the O'Reilly thing. They were going to facilitate the trade with some cap space. Unfortunately, the injuries prevented that. But cap space is their weapon going into the deadline. So I'm with you. I don't think they'll retain on long term or anything, but short term, I think that's where they really want to,
Yeah.
maximize their greatest asset. Hello to the chat. Hey Thomas, how's it going? James mentions Carolina could absorb that contract, and that wouldn't surprise me. But I heard Carolina's looking for a defenseman, so if they're gonna move, they might go to a defenseman there. Yeah. Oh, hey. Yeah. There you go. I just caught up to the part where Kay Paper Dolls already said the thing about Arpin. So thank you for that. We also had someone that was at the game. Who was at the game tonight? I already lost my link. Yeah. Anyways, shout out for being at the game. Was it? I'm great at not. Oh, maybe they deleted their message. Either way, fun game to watch. What do you do? What do you say to fans that get upset when the Canadians win a game, especially, let's be honest, against the Devils? Like this is one of the best constructed teams I've seen in a long time. For some weird reason tonight they didn't quite have it together, but Montembeault was dominant. What do you say to fans who are like, this is absolutely ruining the moment? Is there any value to these wins?
I think Kent Hughes said it best. He said these, wins only help us to a certain extent, losses only help us to a certain extent. I'm a believer that, winning culture is important. I know people laugh at that idea. I don't think that them, bottoming out this season is going to. I don't think them bottoming out this season is going to destroy that culture, though. I think that culture is Marty, it's Adam Nicholas, it's Marie-Philippe Poulin, it's surrounding them with winners. Ultimately, I think it just comes down to there's nothing we can do about it, right? As much as it would be nice to have the best odds going into it, there's nothing we can do about any of this. There's even if they bottom out and they somehow finish the season in last place, there's still a 75% chance that they do not pick first overall.
Yeah.
I think people look at last year and they saw Montreal win that lottery, and we've kind of tricked ourselves into believing that finishing dead last is a guarantee. And it's not. That was last year. They had I believe they had even lower odds. I think it was closer to 20%. Now they bumped it up, but they only have the first two picks being lotteried off. There's just nothing we can do about it, right? I don't think that this team. I'm not going to say that they don't need Connor Bedard. Every team needs Connor Bedard. He's going to come into the league ready to put up a massive amount of points on an entry-level deal. Any team could deal with that. But one Connor Bedard does not a rebuild make. It's not going to be something that okay, we have Connor Bedard, we're Stanley Cup contenders immediately. And in the same sense, they're going to build a team around quality hockey players. Everyone says, oh, all of these teams that win Stanley Cups have first overall picks on them. Yeah, and Montreal has one of those. His name's Juraj Slafkovsky. I know he's not playing right now, but he's that guy. You can make arguments about, it was a weak draft year, all you want. He's still that guy. So I'm at a point with this team where if they win, sick, they won. That's really cool. I like seeing this team win. If they lose, cool. The tank gets a little bit better. But if you look down in the standings, a lot of the teams that shouldn't be winning right now are winning. Look at it. Arizona's red hot right now. I don't know how they pulled it off, but they are.
Which is, yeah, well, it's funny. I looked at the roster the other day and I was a bunch of Buds Flippets and Marc, guys I just didn't recognize in the roster.
Yeah.
Now, to put home that point, I know it's a WHL, but Regina is not going to make the playoffs last I checked. And this is where Connor Bedard is putting up 105 points and he's almost at 2.5 points per game. So you're right in the sense that one Connor Bedard is not a rebuild make. However, I think everyone else is going to say this. Yeah, he's damn good. Okay. He's when we talked about Tim Turk, the shooting coach, he said this guy is almost reinventing how we have to teach guys to shoot. So yeah, it would be great. But as we talked to earlier in the show, almost a historic year for forwards. Even if you're not in the top 5, you're looking at guys like Will Smith or I'm also forgetting his name. But anyways, there's talent right outside in that 4, 5, 6 range. So or Zach Benson or something along those lines. We're going to. Oh yeah, by the way, it was all gas, no gassy. That was at the Devils game, which emptied out a little early. Hey, Devils fans they've been pretty intense this year. Booing their teams, even though I like it. They're excited for the future, so that's always fun to see. We have a Yeah, okay, so as Pibertal says here, it feels like some people have written off the year. I mean, I kind of wrote it off in terms of development, or sorry, in terms of standings, but there's things to look at. Development wise, how are you feeling about some of these young players? Because the shine kind of wore off, Ian. We're looking at down the grind, the stretch. We're seeing
Yeah.
guys are injured, guys are falling to the wayside. Who, out of all the young players, has impressed you most to this point?
I think it's got to be Kirby Doc for me. I knew he was going to be good. I think I kind of laughed at the idea that he would, be a 55 point player. People said that at the beginning of the year. I kind of set expectations a little bit lower than that,
Mhm.
but he's been phenomenal. He's wildly outplayed my expectations for him. And to do it, not only on the wing with Caulfield and Suzuki, but to drive
Everywhere.
his own line.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like he is a a self-driving machine here. He doesn't obviously playing with better players makes him a good player, but he's a good player in his own right. So I think the answer's got to be Kirby Doc. Kind of knew Caden Gooley was going to play well. I mean, he's not this well, of course. Like he was fantastic before his injury. Um, and I've been if I could pound on Marty St. Louis' door to have him put Harris on the power play, I would.
Aha. He's who I had in
But
mind, is Jordan Harris.
yeah, he's been fantastic, and I think as I mentioned earlier, the fact that they're activating their defense a little bit more is going to play into his strengths particularly well.
Yeah, because he is probably the most intelligent player on the roster. Well, like you have Nick Suzuki's up there, but Jordan Harris, the way he anticipates, where he processes the game, is I would argue kind of elite.
Yeah,
Almost to the point that it's kind of ridiculous. Martin Saint Louis hasn't made a lot of mistakes, but I'm with you on the power play thing because if we go back, not as last year, but the year before that, Northeastern. I mean, I think he led the league in defenseman scoring. He was fantastic. He was the power play quarterback. So I actually see Barron. And Barron has the shot, but Harris has that mobility, the ability to open up passing lanes. I see those two guys as right now, based on who they have, the future of the power play, and it's encouraging to see because it won't all be on Lane Hudson, going forward. But
yeah.
let's talk about that. You mentioned earlier maybe one more year. Did you really think that Lane Hudson would be able to jump into the NHL next year?
I mean, from an offensive standpoint, I don't think he really has anything else to prove. It would just be sending him back down with the idea of him getting stronger defensively. Um, but from what I've read, it seems like his defense has come a long way. He's not the biggest player. I mean, I know that we all joke about him
Yeah, but he
having that
grows every
letter that
week. He's growing
yeah,
an inch every week.
yeah, yeah. He's gonna be 8'9" by the
Right?
time the training camp rolls around. Yeah, I mean, I think that they're not in any rush to bring him into the NHL. Usually, a player like him would get brought in with the expectation that, we're bringing you in so you can burn a year off of your entry level deal, just like they did with Cole Caulfield and they did with Ryan
Like they're
Paling.
gonna do with Sean Farrell. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. He's an excellent example of that. Um, I just wonder if he's best served going back there and playing one more year. There's no rush to get him over here.
No.
Obviously, they're going to decide what's best for the player. Maybe what's best is having him here working with Adam Nicholas every day. Who knows? I
I
would
like
like
that.
to see it. I really like Lane Hudson. He is the prospect on this team that I have had absolutely no luck in controlling my excitement over. Like he's every time you log on to Twitter, you see that he's doing something that hasn't been
Right.
done since Kale McCarr and Adam Fox. Like it's exciting.
I was just going over his numbers for I do the prospect power ranking, so it's not like a long term thing; it's just short term. And his numbers this week is a goal and an assist in 2 games, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of a disappointing week for Lane Hudson. Like point per game,
Yeah,
disappointing for Lane Hudson. I think obviously defensively positioning, there's a lot to work on. I don't see the issue of him staying an extra year, but when you mention Adam, one of the things at development camp, I had a chance. Like Lane Hudson was the guy that caught my eye. I'll be honest, I didn't have
hmm
a ton of time to prepare for the draft, so I was kind of learning on the go. And when I spoke to Adam, we almost just grunted. I'm like, "What about that Hudson?" He's like, "Ah," and I'm like, "Ugh," and then we just started grunting at each other. Like we turned into cavemen, but we were so excited, like, "Ooh, Hudson!" That And as a skills coach, I asked him about the skating and whatnot. He's like, "Man, if I'm gonna carve out a sculpture in granite, I want a big building block. He has the talent, he has the intelligence. we can work on that. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a big deal to fine tune his skill because he's so smart. So for that, for those worried about, rushing him or anything, obviously I think an extra year is good, but worst case scenario wouldn't be the worst thing. And I like the point you bring up to work with Adam. Okay, so we have Goalie Nation, Barron Empire, and all that. So we need one for Harris. Hold on, we have Harris Fiefdom? No, Harris Hamlet. Harris Hamlet, I like that. Harris Coalition. Sounds like a little sounds a little political for my liking.
Yeah, a little bit.
What else do we have there? Huzzah for Harris. That's good too. Okay, we're gonna have to think of a better one. But Jordan Harris deserves his own intense, obsessed fan club, in my opinion. And for those that didn't get a chance to see the chat, he spoke with Miker Guerrier and Georges Larac. The Montreal Canadiens produced this video. Really well done. Miker did such a great job directing the conversation, and just listening to Jordan Harris speak. Beyond an athlete, he's a person we can learn from. Like, he's an old soul, but geez, he's wise in current up to date references in life. He's one of the few that has spoken at length about situations that aren't always comfortable to speak about. So I'm a big fan of Jordan Harris on and off the ice. Okay, they decided. Okay, Noel says Harris Hamlet, but I like this one from Remily. Harrisburg. Just because
Harrisburg. There you go.
Close,
I like it.
For close to Montreal, Harrisburg. There's upper state New York. It's made famous from the Cowboy Fringant song "Welcome to Plattsburgh." All right. So, Kirk here. I'm going to show it. Kirk is a big Leafs fan. Yeah, Habs are lame. I know, Kirk. They're lame. The Leafs are great until they lose one period and have a complete meltdown and try to redefine their lives because they sunk their entirety of their soul and their destiny and their hopes and their dreams and their love in a team that will never win again. But how's it going? Welcome to the chat. Okay, so let's move on to the rest of the schedule. Ian, have you looked at their March schedule? Because I have.
Yeah, I just broke it down a little bit on the latest episode of the Build. It's a gauntlet. It's going to be very, very difficult for them to come out the other side in one piece.
They play, I think, 11. No, it's 16 times or 15 times in 30 days. We also have every single team except for 3, I believe, in our playoff position. They're going up against like some of the best teams. I know I was getting mocked a little bit today, and I deserve it. I deserve to get mocked for many things, but for the strength of schedule thing. But statistically speaking, the Canadiens are actually in a pretty good, like for everyone worried about the tank, pretty good spot to pick 4, 5, 6. It's going to be impossible to catch. Actually, everyone's sleeping on Columbus and Anaheim. But statistically, they're actually having worse underlying seasons than Chicago. Either way, those three terrors, but those 3 terrible teams can't be touched. Vancouver is playing better. San Jose is playing better. Arizona is actually surprisingly playing better. So pretty decent odds going down the stretch. Okay, yeah, the chat decided it's going to be Harrisburg. I think we're all going to Harrisburg, yeah.
So you're the mayor of Harrisburg then.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I just look at him as a guy that can retrieve pucks, that plays well, and him and Kovacevic have been the Canadiens' best pairing this year. Like, they're the new Kulak and Petrie, but they're both Kulaks because I think they're underrated. Do you see that pairing being something you can work on in the future, or is Kovacevic really a band-aid move?
I hope Kovacevic isn't a band-aid move. I think we have a tendency to look at waiver claims as just like, they're just here to fill a roster spot for now until someone else bigger and better comes along. This is Kovacevic's rookie season. His underlying numbers have looked fantastic. Him and Harris as a pairing have been fantastic, but Kovacevic stands out in his own right as
even when he's not with Harris.
Yeah, it just is a really steady defenseman. I've enjoyed watching them. I think he fits the mold of what the Canadiens are trying to do pretty well. Kovacevic to me fits like the new wave of hockey where all of his underlying numbers look particularly strong, but then also he's like massive. So like your random uncle will also like him because he's big and pushes guys out from the front of the net. So he kind of like he's a crowd pleaser. Like I genuinely enjoy watching him play, and it's just. You go back to that time of the season where I forget who it was. Was it Valimaki out of Calgary was also on waivers, and everyone was
Mhm.
hounding on the Canadians to pick him up, and they go out and get Kovacevic instead, and it's like I don't who's this guy,
Yeah.
and he's played really really well this year, so it's exciting. I hope he's not a throwaway. But with that said, like things are going to get really really congested on that blue line really fast.
Mhm. We're looking at it's not just the players that are there, and they're all young, right? That's the other part of it. But
Yeah.
I do love the part that he passes the mon oncle test. For those in French, that's uncle test. That's your uncle that drinks la bat 50, always the first guy that's drunk at every Christmas. And he loves, oh, yeah, je l'adore, Kovacevic. So, yeah, he passes both tests. And you know what? He's actually like just a genuine, he's like a golden retriever of a human. Like Jonathan Kovacevic is intelligent and he's nice, and I feel like he's the kind of guy you want to go fishing with. You know what I mean? Like he
Yeah.
passes the fishing test and he passes the Mononc test. So that is yeah, and also that he plays on the right, as James Mahoney mentions. I mean, that was the main reason they picked him up, right? Is they
Right.
basically said we will grab anyone with a pulse, but they ended up getting Matheson's been good, but their most reliable defenseman, health included, has been Jonathan Kovacevic, which is
Yeah.
just fantastic to see that you don't have to put the money or time into development and you still get him. And hey, like Jets fans are happy for him too. They're not doing any worse for wear, so that worked out quite well, quite well.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna wrap up in just one moment. Because obviously there's a lot coming up here. We're going to see the Montreal Canadiens against the Philadelphia Flyers coming up. What do you want to see in the next few games from guys like Jesse Ylönen, Alex Belzil? Is there time left in the season for them to really kind of notch their spot in this team?
I don't know. I mean, I think they've done an admirable job in the position that they've been in. I thought, like, Michael Pezzetta gets an A for effort just about every night. He made a couple of really nice plays tonight, just knocking pucks off guys' sticks. Ulinen's really the only one on there that I think has long-term potential with this team, just given, his age and his play style. I'd like to see Ulinen move up a little bit in the lineup. Maybe, after the trade deadline, maybe a couple bodies are moved out and there a space is made for him. But for now, I mean, they're playing for, NHL jobs, whether that's here or elsewhere. There's no shame in that. Like I think Belzil's played a really big part in solidifying that fourth line. You
Mm-hmm.
know, making it so that we're not playing 11 forwards and 7 defensemen every night. It wears on the rest of the lineup when you can't roll 4 lines. There were moments late in this game where they were still rolling the fourth line out there, even though New
Right.
Jersey was really pressing after they got back within 2. I noticed that they were still rolling Jesse Ylönen out there, so the fourth line is still out there in key moments. They're playing for NHL jobs. I hope they get them somewhere. I hope that it's in Montreal. Maybe they find the space for them.
Yeah, well, that would be fantastic. But as Kay mentions, we're looking at a playoff run here. Are we anticipating Laval wanting them back? Yes. And they are in the hunt for the playoffs because every single team in the AHL makes the playoffs. 23 teams make the
Mm.
playoffs. And it's a little nuts the way they do it. So one division gets 7, the next division gets, no, 6, 5, 7. Anyways, it's the AHL. And then the first round is the best 2 out of 3. Then you go 3 out of 5. And then you do a dance, you do a jig to see who gets a chair, and the person that gets a chair moves on to the next round. Either way,
Yeah.
it's actually impressive that Laval's been doing, again, as we spoke about earlier, Jean-Francois Houle deserves some big props. All right, so we're going to go ahead and end it here. Fantastic game all around. Justin Barron, Jonathan Kovacevic. The great part here is that we're seeing guys that wouldn't have had an opportunity, getting their chance. Raphael Harvey-Pinard, for example. But we also saw Nick Suzuki score, and to me, Ian, that's important because we're seeing him not necessarily have to drive the train, and that's what he's had to do all year. Um, are you worried about Nick Suzuki's last little slump per se?
No, because I think, context is everything.
Mm-hmm.
It, it's been a tough go for him just because of how much he's being asked to do on a regular basis. Like the scoring is going to be there. I'm not worried about him just forgetting how to score overnight. It's just like he's being asked to go out there against every team's top opponents and
Mm-hmm.
also penalty kill and do that all in front of a defense who has a hard time moving the puck out of their zone. Or a goaltender who on occasion can let in one that doesn't deserve to go in. So there are a lot of other factors to Suzuki's game than just his goal scoring. Statistically, the players on this team, they're all going to look pretty bad in
Yep.
one respect. It's a bad hockey team, and it's weird that people are surprised like that their underlying numbers look rough. They get caved in a lot of the time in shots and expected goals. Like as much as like we've kind of all started to love the players on this team and grow a fondness for them, it's not a good hockey team. Like
No.
the fact that Suzuki, you know, is doing what he is doing at the moment is perfectly reasonable for me. Now, when they flip that switch and they're going to start going for it again, if he goes on those long scoring droughts, it's going to be a little bit of a different story.
Mhm.
But I'll worry about things twice or once. I'm not going to do it twice. He's fine. The situations that he's being deployed in are massively underplayed at the moment.
If you're a coach game planning, you basically put a red circle around Suzuki, and you're like, all right, guys, like let's break and go to Red Lobster before before the game. Like it's you're right. He's facing a ton of difficult assignments and shutdown experts, and I feel like at one point he was getting frustrated, but now he's kind of fallen into that like work on small things type of mentality. Work towards the future and
Yeah.
don't worry too much, because I feel he did actually put a lot of weight on his back in terms of the pressure of not winning, because
Yeah.
statistically speaking, this guy's a winner, right? So all in all, I think as his first year as captain of the Canadiens, well, what would you grade him? What would you grade Suzuki? I mean, like, it's really tough, right? Because we're talking about some of the legends of the game. We're not in the locker room, but hey, we're in the business of making wild assumptions. What do you grade Nick Suzuki on his first year as a captain?
Yeah, it's kind of lame to give him a C because he's already got one. But I mean,
Oh, every dad
I
right now
think
is like, oh.
yeah, I think I look like he's the situation that he's been put in is incredibly unique.
Mhm.
Like we have never seen a Canadians team that has been so openly just saying we're not trying to be anything other than a basement dweller this season,
Yeah.
right? Like I know that they haven't come out and actively said we are rebuilding, we're tearing this thing down, but it's blatantly obvious by everything that they're doing.
Yeah.
There's been no captain who's ever been put under this situation. So,
And he's the
for
youngest
Suzuki,
captain in franchise history.
yeah, and not only that, like, when he was named captain, everyone was like, "Oh, he's too young." Well, yes, in age, but like he's played in a Stanley Cup final.
Yeah.
Like he's played in a Stanley Cup final. He's played in playoff runs in a bubble. He
Mhm.
plays, he's gone on Memorial Cup runs. Like he's played some very, very important hockey in his career. So, I never took the age to be any part of it. He's a different cat. Like he's just I've never been worried about him from a captain standpoint. So I guess, I give him a B for like just the team's not revolting against him, like we've seen happen in the
Yeah.
past.
Because it's been a tough
Yeah,
season. Yeah.
no, and he's handled everything really well. I'm very much looking forward to him being able to take a break at some point.
Yeah, me too. I kind of wished he had a break at the All Star game. Okay, Jeff Boisvert asked what's with Yanni Nienema, because he's an All Star, man. That's why I have Yanni Nienema up there. I want to get the picture print. You know which picture I'm talking about.
Oh yeah,
The Yanni, and I also
the
have
one.
like, I mean, I have this nameplate too from the locker room, but we put stars up there. Andre Markov was a legend, but Yanni Nienema, now that is cult. All right, so we didn't even get to trading all our players, but we'll have to do that in the next episode. As Gianni mentions here, Dadanov and Dvorak have been quite good. Jonathan Drouin is actually their hottest scorer right now, even though he didn't get a point. The trade deadline is coming soon, so we're gonna talk about that in another episode. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. But against the Flyers, which I believe is Thursday, I should know my schedule, we have a special guest, actually, former NHL referee Dave Jackson's going to be joining us. I figured a Flyers game would be fun to bring in a referee, and you know what? We really criticize them a lot, so it'll give him an opportunity to kind of defend himself. And also, it's going to be his son's first game as a linesman in the NHL, so we'll get his reaction on that. It should be very cool. Montreal native Dave Jackson, former NHL referee. Yes. Oh, Friday. Thank you. Trizak knows my... Thank God someone knows the schedule. Well, good. That means I can do something on Thursday. So it's Friday against the Philadelphia Flyers. Ian, where can we find you?
Yeah, find me on Twitter at maybe it's Ian, at Rabbit Hamster for the blog. The Build is available everywhere you find podcasts. For those not familiar, I'm recording a show that will go until the Canadiens win a Stanley Cup, and once they do, the show's over. So get in while the getting's good.
All right, and of course I forgot to tell everyone to like the chat because I'm just terrible like that. I'm 1,000 years old. Like the chat, subscribe, and all that fun stuff that my bosses tell me to do that I forget every time. Salut tout le monde, and shout out to Colin McDonald from Nam. I'm assuming Vietnam, or it might be Nantucket. Maybe that's just a different way to it's right beside Nantucket is Namtucket. But thanks for joining all of us. I'm gonna finish this off by trading Jake Allen to. Who am I trading Jake Allen to? I don't know. This is a tough one. It's going to go in the West. Which Western team is Jake Allen getting traded to?
I'll say the Oilers because it's funny.
Yes, absolutely. They need 17 goalies on their roster. Shout out to James. Shout out to Colin, to Gianni, to Ramelli, Noel, Claire, Paper Dolls. I'm missing a bunch of people. And Jeff, who hates the Niinema thing, but you got to love the history of Jani Niinema. Join us on Friday. We will be joined by former NHL referee Dave Jackson, ESPN referee specialist. And in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. This was fun. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that other fun stuff. Salut for now. I am Marc Dumont, and this has been Game Over.
Game over! Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada Sportsbook.